like a little podium. I forgot to ask that, but they had a podium set up last time, so I just assumed that would happen. But
Or good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out on a cold night, and hello to those folks who are watching on the live stream. My name is Lori Lightfoot, and with my colleague Amanda Kite, we're from the Charles River Associates, and we are here to provide to the members of the Board of Trustees and the public our final report regarding our investigation of the allegations of financial mismanagement and other matters concerning the Village of Dolton. A couple of quick housekeeping matters. You should be circulating index cards if you want to ask us questions. We're going to go through the entire presentations first. I'm not promising you that we're going to be able to answer everyone's question, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. We will set up, for those that we aren't able to answer, we will set up a microsite and have answers to the different questions there. Also, that's circulating is a document that if you want a hard copy or an electronic copy of this PowerPoint presentation, give us your name and your email address, and we'll make sure that you get it within the next 24 hours. All right. Well, make sure you fill out the paperwork. There's sheets going around that you should be able to put your name and your email address, and then we'll be able to provide you with a copy of the deck. The deck is long, and given the number of people that were here, we felt like it made more sense to provide electronic copies and try to anticipate how many people would want a copy. Let's go. So let me start by saying that, as you know, we began this investigation in earnest back in the spring of 2024 after the trustees overrode a veto of the resolution hiring us through the Legislative Council. We were tasked with looking into irregularities, allegations of irregularities regarding financial mismanagement by Mayor Tiffany Henyard and others in her administration. And I want everyone to be clear, we are not conducting a criminal investigation. This is an investigation that depended upon witness testimony, that depended upon getting access to certain documents. Next slide. And to be clear, we did not receive total cooperation in this investigation. In fact, we encountered many challenges getting access to relevant documents and information from the very beginning of the engagement. We do not have subpoena power as an independent investigative team, which would have allowed us to obtain materials and cooperation from individuals. The village's personnel policies do not require cooperation with internal investigation. That proved to be a challenge in this circumstance. And the lack of cooperation by some individuals led to delays, limited our abilities and the scope of the work, and ultimately limited the information that we were able to address in the course of this investigation. Despite these obstacles, we made progress in providing information to the trustees and to the public on the true financial condition of the village of Dolton, along with some other issues. And as a result of that, we're able to make some concrete recommendations, many of which the trustees have already adopted, on how to right the ship, to make sure that there are financial guardrails in the operation of city government, and to provide some other supports that would all be in favor of transparency and good governance. For those of you who don't know, we thought it would be important to give just a little bit of background about the village of Dolton. The village was incorporated in 1892. And according to the most recent census data, the population is approximately 21,426. The median household income is 58,706, and the village is approximately 91% African American. The village has a trustee form of government, which matters under the organization of the Illinois Municipal Code, and we'll talk about that briefly in a moment. The key city employees for the village, aside from the trustees, are the mayor, the village administrator, the director of administration, director of finance, and now, I'm not going to read everything on this slide. This is excerpts from the Illinois Municipal Code, but suffice it to say that the code really is a set of specific mandates on how a trustee form of government and other forms of government are supposed to conduct themselves. It provides things like there should be an annual appropriation, and ideally that is done in the first quarter of the village's fiscal year. No official can incur debt over and above what the budget is unless there is a 2/3 majority vote by the board trustees. There can't be entering into contracts without a corresponding appropriation. The municipality must have an audit of its financial records annually. As you know, this became an issue. We'll talk more about that as well. And that audit and other financial information must be filed annually with the comptroller's office, or as has happened now to Dolton, the comptroller has the ability to force an audit of the financial records. Now, on that point, if you go to the comptroller's office and you look under on their website under the municipal division, there are literally hundreds of municipalities across the state of Illinois who have not filed the necessary financial documents, whether it's the financial report, whether it's the audit, and some of these delinquencies go back years. But soon after we had our report in early August of last year, the comptroller's office suddenly paid attention to the village of Dolton and took notice, while other municipalities across the state have been delinquent in their responsibilities for years. One might ask, why is that so?
Right.
Of governance for the village are not assembled in one location, filed with the state, so that all of you can look up what's the code say on this, that, or the other thing. This became something that we learned early on, which a little bit of a surprise, but became another challenge to overcome, and making sure that we had a true picture of what the rules and laws were that had been passed that govern the village of Dolton. As a result, the absence of archived ordinances and resolutions not being readily public led to gaps in our understanding about the laws, making governance unnecessarily difficult. Next slide. One thing, given what you've heard and seen over the course of the last couple of years, the village actually does have a purchasing policy and manual. And it's very straightforward, as you might expect. The challenge has been, it hasn't been followed, and we'll get into details about that. But let me give you a little specifics. The policy essentially provides directions for the acquisition of all goods and services. And when used with good judgment and common sense, as it reads, the quote, the policies and procedures conveyed within will allow the village to obtain required supplies and services efficiently and economically. The policy also provides, in general, all supplies, materials, equipment, contractual and professional services required for operational efficiency will have been included in the annual budget. Next slide. There is in this purchasing policy set controls on who can authorize what at what dollar levels. As you can see from this slide, department heads can authorize spending up to $1,000. Between $1,001 and $5,000, the village administrator can approve. And over $5,000, any expenses for goods or services over that amount must be brought to the village board for approval as set forth in the purchasing policy. The finance department is supposed to have a position called the staff accountant. That person is responsible for centralizing and overseeing the purchase of goods and services for the village, and to determine whether or not an item proposed to be spent, that there are adequate funds and proper purchasing procedures have been followed before any monies of the village are incurred. That person is supposed to be reviewing and initiating all purchase orders, payment requests after they are submitted to the finance department for payment. They're supposed to be centralized purchasing. That makes sense because in best practices, you want to make sure that there's not what we call rogue spending going on, and that the village is getting the benefit of its bargain by maximizing its buying power. The purchasing policy specifically says that those items are supposed to be uniformly purchased by the purchasing agent. And the purchasing policy also requires the use of purchase orders. Those are essentially requisitions for goods and services, and it's detailed there. Similarly, the purchasing policy requires that when a purchase order is issued, it has the same authorization requirements as other matters. 1,000 by department heads, 5,000 by, up to 5,000 by the village administrator. Anything over 5,000 has to come before the board for approval. Now, just to give you a little bit of context, we're going to be using this term as we go forward in this presentation. There's something called a warrant that is used that also dictates how municipal funds are spent. The warrant is typically created based upon invoices that are created by a vendor and submitted to the department head for approval. As we told you in August, there is no electronic process for the submission of invoices from vendors. Paper copies, typically sent either in by hand or by email, are sent to department heads for approval. They must then list them in an electronic payment system called My Viewpoint, and then that generates the items that appear on the warrant list. Based upon our investigation, there are essentially two kinds of warrant lists. There's an accounts payable warrant list, which includes most of the village's expenses. And then there's a second warrant list that's called the electronic list, which includes payments made by wire, ACH, credit card, or any other electronic or online method. Next slide. The village expenditures, as reflected on the warrant list, are then reviewed and approved by the board at each board meeting. And after an expense is approved by the board, Janice Johnson, who's the Director of Administrative Services, is supposed to prepare a check for signature and payment. However, if Ms. Johnson is directed by Mayor Henyard or someone else, or there are insufficient funds to pay the item on the warrant list, then those checks are held. And apart from payroll, the accounts payable warrant list reflects invoices that have been submitted for approval and payment but not yet paid. And we understand from the John Kasparic accounting firm, which is essentially the outside firm for the village of Dolton, that there are many items that appear on the electronic warrant list that have already been approved before they are presented to the board. Now, next slide. As it relates to credit card expenditures, we also understand from John Kasparic personnel that credit card balance is paid as a matter of course, meaning that as the bill becomes due, it's paid before it reaches the board for approval. In general, credit card expenses are only added to the warrant list when there's a receipt submitted. What we found is that many credit card expenditures never make it onto the warrant list for approval, in part because there's not a system for ensuring that there are receipts for the various credit card purchases. And what this means, unfortunately, is that the Board of Trustees, in many instances, was not able to even track or see credit card purchases that were being done over the last few years. Let's go on. Let's give a little background on Mayor Tiffany Henyard. As many of you know, she's a lifelong resident of the village. She served as a village trustee from 2013 to 2021. Her bio cites that she graduated from Robert Morris College, although we were unable to verify that. And she became mayor as of May 2021. Now, keep in mind, folks, there were two elections. There was an election at the end of February that went to a runoff, and then there was a final election later that spring. At the time of that second election, according to records provided to us by the County Clerk's Board of Elections, only 9.5% of registered voters in Dolton came out to vote. To set the framework further, we wanted to make sure you understood who were the people in charge of making various decisions under Mayor Henyard's administration. Aside from Mayor Henyard was the village administrator. You may recall that that was initially Dorothy Brown. And then in late 2021, Keith Freeman began his duties as the village administrator. The director of finance, you would think this is a very key position. Unfortunately, what we found over the course of our investigation is there are many periods of time during Mayor Henyard's tenure where that position was vacant. At one point, Tanjanique Miller fulfilled the role sometime in 2022 on a full-time basis, and then she went to a part-time basis by December of 2023 and worked only remotely. The position has been vacant again since early 2024. As I mentioned before, the Director of Administration is Janice Johnson, and you remember from my discussion about the purchasing policy, where there's supposed to be somebody who's a staff accountant that is responsible for monitoring and overseeing the purchase of goods and services on behalf of the village. There's no such position that exists in the village of Dolton. As a result of the small staff managing the city finances, the John Kasparek firm has essentially become the in-house, although they're outside, but the in-house financial department for the village of Dolton. Because there are a limited number of personnel, they became the de facto finance department. This remains true to this day. Kasparek firm has a junior staffer who is embedded in the village, and that person is here multiple times a week. There's a senior person that oversees that junior staffer, and the John Kasparek firm is involved in virtually every aspect of the finances of the village. Reconciling bank records, assisting in the preparation of payroll, creating those monthly warrant lists, village accounting records, as well as a variety of other expenses. And as you might imagine, ladies and gentlemen, that kind of work, day in and day out, month after month, is not cheap. So the village is paying an extraordinary amount for outside services because it doesn't have the staff internally to do that. And in the absence of the director of finance, without the board of trustees being directly involved, there is very little oversight over the work that's being done on your behalf. Now, I want to also now shift gears and talk about some key events that have led to some of the financial crises that the village is experiencing. And what we found in our investigation, and that's based on a review of contemporaneous documents and witness interviews, that beginning at least as early as late 2021, there was a concerted, systematic effort on behalf of Mayor Henyard and others in her administration to hide the true financial condition of the village of Dolton from the trustees and from members of the public. To step back, let's talk about what the state of play was before Mayor Henyard became mayor. What we found is that prior to that time, the Kasparek firm would provide 3 different and important categories of information to the entire board of trustees, key city personnel, to make sure that folks were up to speed on a real-time basis as to what the circumstances were, both of expenses and revenue, and whether or not the expenses and revenue were on track with budget projections. They created a weekly report reflecting what work they did on behalf of the village, monthly financial statements with the detailed notes memorized in an accompanying memo, warrant lists which detailed the expenditures that you presented at board meetings, and for a time, Kasparek firm also prepared and shared a payroll list. Now, initially, in 2021, at the beginning of Mayor Henyard's term, Chris Maragali of the Kasparek firm caused these documents to be sent to a wide array of people on an email. And again, the trustees, key city employees, and Mayor Henyard herself. But this practice began to change in the fall of 2021. What we see in the fall of 2021 is the start of the effort to make sure that the trustees did not have full access to information about the true financial condition of the village's finances. And I want to walk you through step-by-step evidence that we were able to review that was memorialized contemporaneously, primarily in emails. In September 28, 2021, in an email to John Kasparek, Chris Mirabali, remember this guy who's responsible for supervising the work here at Dolton, noted, quote, "The mayor has requested that the warrant list for both electronic and regular billing be sent to her first for review and approval prior to it being released to the board." On October 4th, 2021, Trustee House emailed Mirabali seeking missing payroll reports that he had not received since the August 27, 2021 payroll. That same day, Mirabali forwarded that email from Trustee House to Mayor Henyard and sought advice on how to respond. On October 21st, 2021, Chris Mirabali reported to John Kasparek via email that Mayor Henyard was very upset with him because he disclosed in a board meeting that she had directed him not to send trustees payroll records. There's a board meeting that precedes this October 21st date, where you can see on the YouTube video that she's asking him, "Did I tell you not to send this information?" He answered in the affirmative, and then that was the source of her anger with him. He was later called into a meeting with the mayor in the presence of Janice Johnson and Dorothy Brown, and the mayor in effect told him that he should never contradict her in public and that he should shade the truth. By November of 2021, a split between Henyard and certain trustees was in full bloom and played out in the trustees' shrinking access to village financial information. And on January 22nd, 2022, Mirabali again transmitted the December financials and a corresponding memo to the full list, including the trustees. But by February 9th, Trustee Steve sent an email to Mirabali and others objecting to not having received payroll reports for approval and saying that he would not provide his consent for approval by the board if he did not receive those payroll records ahead of time. Trustee House concurred in that same email chain. On February 24th, and this is an important date, Mirabali transmitted the January financials and the accompanying Miller only to Tanjani Miller. At that point, the trustees were cut out. On March 9th, 2022, Mirabali sent his weekly report to the mayor, trustees, and others. The next day, Freeman admonished Mirabali and said, quote, "Chris, please stop sending these emails to everyone. It is a direct violation of the Open Meetings Act. Send this information to Ms. Miller and Janice," meaning Janice Johnson, end quote. I can tell you that the mere transmittal of information where there's no actual action being taken is not a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So in sum, by March 2022, the trustees were effectively cut off from receiving regular financial reports generated by the Kasparek firm, which would have provided them with information on the true financial condition of the village, and they would have been able to see at that point that there was a significant increase in expenses, as we reported previously, while at the same time, there was not revenue to match those expenses. Now I want to shift gear and talk to you a little bit about FOIA. Now, this is not a FOIA class. I'm not going to go in chapter and verse. But the bottom line, as many of you know, is that under Illinois law, municipalities are required to keep and produce the records of governance to anybody who asks for them, with a narrow set of exceptions. And that means that the municipality has to set up a process by which people who want certain kinds of information can get that information, and that they have a certain timeline in which they have to provide that information. They can ask for an extension of time, but what they cannot do is simply ignore requests coming in through the Freedom of Information Act. Let's go to the next slide. Now, from May 21st, from May of 2021 through September of 2023, based on our review of relevant FOIA records and witness testimony, there were a significant number of FOIA requests that came into the village. Most of these requests were ordinary type. People asking about particular addresses within the village, people seeking other information. But what we started to see in 21, and then it increased steadily over time, is people asking very specific information about the governance of the village, and in particular, asking information about how money was being spent. At the beginning of Mayor Henyard's tenure, Clerk Allison Key was responsible for FOIA requests. According to Clerk Key, when a FOIA request would come in, she and her team would review it, then they would send it to the relevant department. There were FOIA liaisons in each department, and it was their responsibility to look for responsive documents and then provide them to Clerk Key so that she could respond to the FOIA. The increased number of FOIAs over time posed a challenge given the limited resources that were devoted to FOIA. So what we saw is a very small staff, very few resources, and an expanding number of FOIAs that came in. There were not sufficient resources to be able to meet that rising interest in the governance of the village of Dolton. Now, there were many allegations that we received that Mayor Henyard ordered village personnel to simply stop responding to FOIA. We were not able to verify those allegations, in part because village employees who reported directly to Mayor Henyard did not cooperate in our investigation. However, in April of 2023, trustees passed an ordinance intended to get the FOIA process back on track. And that ordinance read in part, quote, "Whereas the Board of Trustees finds that the village has experienced an insurmountable backlog of FOIA requests due to failures of village staff to respond to requests for information from the FOIA officer at the instruction of the mayor and her village administrator." The trustees obviously believe that that's precisely what had happened, which is that the mayor had instructed people within the departments not to respond to FOIAs. Now, despite the passage of this ordinance, the FOIA process didn't improve. And in fact, it continued to break down the non-cooperation of village staff, and many of whom simply, according to Clerk Key, simply stopped responding to her when she would send them FOIAs. And as a result, you know what's happened. Some of you, I'm sure, experienced it directly when you filed FOIAs. There were appeals made to the Attorney General. In some instances, people simply filed suit. Now, one key milestone that I want to bring to your attention is when Clerk Key was stripped of her jurisdiction over FOIA. As you can see from the screen, she received an email from Keith Freeman on September 7, 2023. And in this email, I'll read the body of it. Dear Clerk Key, I am writing to inform you that you are hereby removed from your duty as a FOIA officer, effective immediately. Your inability to process FOIA requests in a complete and timely manner has left us no choice but to restructure our process going forward. The village has redirected FOIA officer duties to another party, and as such, your services are no longer needed. I have advised all department heads of the change. Now, I want to be clear that Clerk Key denies the various allegations in Freeman's email. But I want to lift up a couple of things that I think are notable about this email in particular. When you see the language, the village has redirected FOIA officer duty to another party. Note in this email, he doesn't say who that other party is. And what we know from our investigation is that we were never able to determine who the person was that's actually handling FOIA and whether or not that person received the proper training. FOIA is not easy. There's a lot of nuances that are involved in the statute to make sure that there's proper compliance. We have no idea to this day whether or not the person or persons who is handling FOIA actually received proper training. There was no effort to take over the files of pending FOIA requests, and there was no process put in place for transitioning of the responsibilities from Clerk Key and her team to the unknown new FOIA officer. There's plenty of evidence, and again, I think you all have experienced it firsthand, that after Clerk Key was removed of her responsibilities over FOIA, the FOIA process didn't get better. If anything, it got worse. And these issues continue to this day. Now, let's shift gears, and we're going to talk about financial management concerns. There was an opportunity for the village of Dolton to take advantage of a $5 million appropriation that had been put in place from one of the state legislatures on behalf of the village of Dolton. This was in the state fiscal year 2023. However, that appropriation, for some reason that we were not able to ascertain, was never taken advantage of, meaning those monies never came into the village of Dolton. So $5 million that could have significantly helped the financial fortunes of this village got recycled and went elsewhere, but never came to the village of Dolton. I want to talk to you next about the American Rescue Plan dollars and funding that came to the village of Dolton. As many of you know, the American Rescue Plan was put into place by the Biden-Harris administration to help municipalities, cities, counties, states recover from the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the village received an allocation through the state, which was appropriated in 2 tranches from the Illinois Comptroller's Office. You can see in this chart, the first tranche came in September of 2021, and the next big tranche came again in September of 22 for a total of just over $3 million. The U.S. Treasury Department had very strict reporting requirements on how municipal governments use those ARPA dollars. Somebody was supposed to be designated as an ARPA reporting person responsible for making sure that they were complying with U.S. Treasury regulations. But contemporaneous documentation that we have seen and confirmed in recent communications is that no one from the village actually took the responsibility to complete the reporting information. The access to the reporting portal was set up for Ms. Miller, the former finance director, but there's no evidence that she actually made the required reporting of how ARPA dollars were used here in the village. And based on the records that we have seen, there's approximately $1.7 million left of the ARPA funds, and it's held in a specific capital projects account. Based on what we've seen in the financial documents, the ARPA funds were used in a variety of ways, as you can see from this chart. As you noted, there's a big category of $481,379 called other expenses. This was used for a variety of different things, from construction materials and supplies, lawn care, pest control, utilities, sprinkler installation, but none of these things were specifically approved by the board. Now, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Amanda Kite, who's going to walk you through some more detailed information on the financial status as of October 31st, 2024. Take it away.
So now we're going to walk through and largely provide an update to the financial information that was presented back in August. And we've been providing records that cover the first 6 months of the village's fiscal year 2025. As of October 2024, the village's general fund, which is the fund that's used to account for the majority of the village's operations, remains in a net deficit position. However, the deficit position has decreased or improved from the information that was presented in August. And as of October 2024, the general fund's net deficit position is currently $2.4 million. Additionally, during the first 6 months of fiscal year 2025, the average monthly expenditures of the village have also decreased. Through fiscal year 2024, the village was spending on average $2.5 million per month. Wow. During the first 6 months of fiscal year 2025, that number is down to $2.1 million per month on average. Following along with that,
I think it's also important to note that we provided an update back in August of last year, which laid out many of these numbers and showed the village in really dire financial condition. The trustees immediately took action to address particularly the spending side of the ledger, significantly reducing the number of credit card access, working with banks, restructuring some of the expenses. So that accounts in part for the reduction in expenses. And as Amanda will explain, there are other factors that contributed to this, but I wanted to note that the trustees heeded the concerns that we raised back in August and took specific action, many times in opposition from Mayor Henyard, to make sure that they were starting a process of putting the village back on better financial footing.
So following along with that, the decrease in expenditures, through the first 6 months of fiscal year 2025, the village's expenditures have matched the revenues that came in during that time period. This is in comparison with the same time period in fiscal year 2024, where the gap in revenue to expenditures was almost $5 million. So the expenditure and revenue gap has improved. This gap decrease is for two primary reasons. First being, as of October fiscal 2025, revenues are approximately $3 million more than compared to the same time period in fiscal year 2024, which is largely due to the timing of when the property taxes were released to the village. In 2023 and 2024, property taxes weren't released until November or December, where in fiscal 2025, they were released much earlier. But additionally, expenditures have gone down, most notably general administration, police department expenditures, and public works. A couple of categories that we found significant decreases is in general administration, telephone, and miscellaneous expenditures, as well as in police department overtime and medical insurance. The village's cash balance has remained generally the same since the information that was presented in August. As you can see from the chart, as of May 2024, the general fund had an unrestricted cash deficit of almost $5.7 million. As of October 24, that amount is a deficit of around $5.5 million. And this deficit includes the amount of held checks that the mayor discussed previously. Those are reflected in these deficit balances. Regarding those held checks, as we presented in August, Since March of 2023, and nearly every month since then, a portion of the checks that were approved and printed have had to be held. As of June 18, 2024, this was 589 checks that totaled over $6 million, which were approved but had not yet been sent to vendors. Since the August presentation, we've requested but had not been provided an updated listing of the current status of the village's held checks. However, we've been told, though not able to verify, that the current amount is still in excess of $5 million. Turning now to discuss the village's use of credit cards. As we discussed in the August presentation, we're aware of 6 different credit cards that have been in use by the village at various points in time from January 2021 through at least June of 2024. Since the August presentation, we did request updated credit card statements that would cover July 2024 through December 2024, but we did not receive any updated credit card records. As you can see from the chart, the use of credit cards steadily increased from calendar year 2021 through 2023. In 2023, the village spent over $775,000 on credit cards. As the mayor earlier discussed, oftentimes credit card expenditures have no accompanying receipts. And the credit card statements alone provide limited information about the credit card purchases. Given this overall lack of available documentation, it is not possible for us to ascertain important information about the village's credit card use, such as who made the purchase, was it an approved purchase, and what was the government purpose. This type of additional information is necessary to perform a complete investigation of the credit card use and to draw any conclusion about any individual purchase. That being said, through our investigation, we did identify certain categories of expenses that stand out, which the village may wish to pursue additional information to further understand the nature of the charges. For example, from 2021 to June of 2024, village credit cards were used for over $171,000 in travel-related costs, things such as airfare, excess baggage fees, hotels, meals, rental cars. There are over $51,000 spent at local area restaurants, as well as expenditures at retailers such as Dick's Sporting Goods, Best Buy, Wayfair, Walgreens, Apple, and Walmart. Now, not all, some of these expenditures, but not all, are reflected on the electronic warrant lists that we were provided and reviewed. However, the level of detail in the description of what the purchase is for varies by purchase. Some purchase limited information, and the description is simply the name of the merchant, or a more vague description such as meals or donuts. Others provide more information, such as training accommodations or code enforcement lunch. One area in our investigation where we were to obtain detailed purchase information relates to Amazon purchases. The vast majority of purchases made by the village on Amazon were paid for with village credit cards. From January 2021 through June of 2024, the village spent approximately $218,000 on purchase from Amazon using village credit cards, the largest spending of which occurred in 2023. Now, the vast majority of the purchases on Amazon do appear to be for routine items such as office supplies, office furniture, and supplies for the police department. And the Amazon order details show that these orders were delivered either to Village Hall or to the police department. Additionally, many of the largest purchases on Amazon, 3 of which we identified in the August presentation, were related to materials or supplies for the skating rink. This includes $5,099 for artificial ice tiles, $33,000 for artificial ice tiles, $5,600 artificial ice tiles, $4,700 artificial ice tiles, and then $3,700 for ice skates.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me just pick up and conclude on the Amazon purchases. The various routine office supply and office furniture purchases simply do not appear to be in compliance with the village's purchasing policy as we described. There appears to be no centralized purchasing or inventory control as required in the purchasing policy. So while we were able to see that these various purchases were delivered either to Village Hall or to the police department, there is no tracking system for what happened to them after they arrived here. And while Janice Johnson was listed as the originator for a number of these purchases, what we saw in the Amazon records is that there were 9 other purchasing sources identified in the Amazon records. So lots of people were billing, charging things and purchasing them from Amazon. And we similarly found no evidence of the purchases related to the ice rink that were done in 5 separate purchases totaling approximately $48,000, that they were done consistent with the purchasing policy either. For example, we were unable to find evidence that these purchases were done as a result of competitive bidding process, which an amount of that size would have been triggered by the purchasing policy, nor is there evidence that these particular purchases were presented to the board prior to approval. As you will see, one of the recommendations that we're making to the board is to institute a written policy for performing background checks of prospective village senior and key personnel. There are 3 personnel that we call out on the slide, and based on our investigation, these and other individuals either working for the village or proposed by Mayor Henyard to assume key roles have issues in their background that likely would be disqualifying if they had been properly vetted. Now, I want to go through some of the consequences, because of course there has been consequences of all the things that we've already talked about. You can't have a situation where there are no financial controls, where the trustees are systematically excluded from finding out the true nature of the financial condition of the village, where there's a routine process of exceeding the amounts of revenue with expenses, some of which may or may not be for a legitimate government purpose. The first of these cascading consequences is the audit. As I noted at the beginning of this presentation, under Illinois law, every municipality over a certain size is required to have a financial audit of its books and records every single year, and to produce that audit to the comptroller's office. The fact of the matter is that for the last several years, the village's auditor had been an accounting firm, an auditing firm known as Lauterbach and Amann. Draft audits for fiscal year 2022 were completed, but they were never finalized. And then Lauterbach and Amann resigned as auditor on October 27, 2024, effective immediately, which is essentially less than 3 weeks after we had our first public disclosure of the true financial condition of the village. And on October 15, 2024, the Illinois Comptroller's Office notified the village that it was going to force an audit on the village for not complying with the mandatory audit reporting requirement. Now, as I noted, there are literally hundreds of municipalities across this state that have long-standing delinquencies in filing their reports, but for some reason, the comptroller decided that Dolton was going to be the example. Next slide. One of the other consequences that we've seen over the course of Mayor Henyard's tenure is a significant uptick in litigation. According to court records maintained by the Legislative Council, 48 separate lawsuits have been filed against the village under Mayor Henyard's tenure. 12 pending matters relate to FOIA violations, and 8 pending matters by village vendors allege improper revocation or failure to renew business licenses. And you may have seen recent reporting that on Friday, Mayor Henyard herself was held in criminal contempt for failing to sign a liquor license for an existing business owner here in the village, despite being ordered by the court to do so multiple times. Those have costs. Next, I want to walk you through the insurance issue, because insurance is a significant cost in the budget for the village of Dolton. The village's insurance needs are primarily handled by 2 entities: an insurance broker, which is Insurer Source LLC, and something called a third-party administrator, which currently is Charles Taylor, TPA. In 2024, the village's insurance coverage became at risk due to late or non-payment of fees. The village's premium financing company sought to avoid its contract with the village, and let me explain what that means. There is a finance company that fronts the money for the village's various insurance costs, and the village pays it back on a monthly basis. But because of non-payment, that finance company walked away from its responsibilities and said, we're not going to we're not going to finance any future funds to the village to pay its insurance. That created a bit of a crisis. The village's longtime third-party administrator, that's the entity that then pays claims that are made by people that trigger the insurance policies. That third-party administrator also walked away and refused to renew its agreement with the village, again, as a result of problems in payment. And then long-time insurance carriers. The village had, like most municipalities, has multiple insurance carriers that cover their insurance, particularly liability insurance. Many of those long-time carriers canceled in the spring of 2024 or declined to renew the village's policies. Next slide. Now, this came at a critical time. The renewal period for village insurance is early August of every year. Typically 60 days before that time, the insurance broker will start negotiating, renewing terms of coverage with the various insurers. You had the TPA walk away, which is known to the insurance companies covering the village. You had the finance company walk away, which is known to the village. And the fact that these other carriers decided not to renew, that also sent a ripple through the insurance market. As a result of the efforts of the insurance broker, he reached out to 36 different insurers, including 10 excess insurers and then 26 non-excess carriers. 5 carriers chose not to renew their coverage for the village. 13 carriers declined to quote coverage for the village, meaning they weren't even interested in providing a quote, and 1 carrier simply didn't respond. And of the excess carriers who provided a quote, they set their threshold for coverage very, very high. 2 set it at 25 million, 4 set it at 10, and 2 at 5, and 1 declined, again, to quote any coverage. Now, the village was eventually able to obtain coverage for the 2024-25 period. However, there were 2 important concessions that the village was compelled to make in order to make sure that it had insurance coverage from August of 2024 to August of 2025. As you can see from this slide, the village was compelled to pay more for less coverage. We have here a kind of side-by-side comparison of what the coverage was under general liability, law enforcement, public official, and auto liability. In the preceding year, the coverages were almost equal at $11 million. But as you can see, in the current coverage period, there's a significant decrease in the amount of insurance coverage that the village now has to handle whatever liability issues may come up. The other significant concession was that the insurance carriers refused to cover Mayor Henyard. As you can see in the third bullet, there's a quote directly from the insurance policy. The insurer covers all elected officials, provides that as a separate part of its coverage, but specifically in writing excluded any claim made against any insured which is brought by, on behalf of, or against the following entities or individuals, and that is Tiffany Henyard. And the emphasis here was in the original. This coverage exclusion regarding Mayor Henyard also applied not only to the general liability policy, but also the law enforcement policy. Now, there are implications for the village given the cancellation of coverage for Mayor Henyard during this coverage period. Mayor Henyard will have to pay for all defensive costs related to her out of pocket, or the village could decide on its own to pay for her coverage, but it won't be covered by the insurance carriers. Now, Mayor Henyard would then be responsible for any judgments, settlements, or attorney's fees rendered against her personally, separate from the village. And there's an open question as to whether or not Mayor Henyard will participate in litigation that she has to pay for herself, and what that would mean for the village if she simply defaults, meaning doesn't show up, doesn't participate in ongoing litigation. So the absence of coverage has significant implications for the village and for the taxpayers of the village of Dolton. Other implications. The fire department. After 2 years with no resolution of a contract, finally in the fall of 2024, Legislative Council was able to reach a collective bargaining agreement with the fire department union, which a majority of the board approved over Mayor Henyard's objections. The village is currently in negotiations with the police department, but the challenge with that, negotiating that contract, is without audited financial statements. And you remember we said there's been no audit of the financial statements since fiscal year 2021. It's difficult for village negotiators to be able to project what revenues are going to be coming in so they know what a fair salary and compensation would be. Now, as we're winding down here, I want to cover quickly some other remaining items that I know are of interest to the public. And let's talk for a minute about the Las Vegas trips and the allegations against Trustee Holmes. There are actually two trips, one in May 22 and another in May 2023, where Mayor Henyard and a large delegation went to an economic development convention in Las Vegas. The convention was called Recon, and that was put on by the International Council of Shopping Centers. Financial records for the village and Thornton Township reflect that a number of people traveled to Las Vegas on both of these trips. And the expenses of their travel, their lodging, their meals, and entertainment were paid for on village and township credit cards. There is no evidence that any business development opportunities came to the village as a result of either of these two trips. You are all aware of the fact that there are allegations against Trustee Holmes as a result of contacts between him and a former village employee on the May 2023 Las Vegas trip. We're not going to go into chapter and verse on this because we are not a criminal investigative authority, but suffice it to say, the allegations are that Holmes took advantage and assaulted a young woman while she was unconscious in his hotel room, that he contacted a village Dolton police officer who was also on the trip, FaceTimed him, showing the young woman unconscious on the hotel room, and some of you are aware that a recording of that FaceTime call has recently surfaced. The young woman eventually filed complaints in Las Vegas and suburban Cook County. Fall of last year, the Las Vegas criminal authorities closed its case after its investigation. The young woman has also filed a complaint with the EOC alleging that she was wrongfully terminated from her employment as a result of making an outcry to Mayor Henyard directly about the alleged assault. And the young woman has subsequently filed a lawsuit which makes similar allegations. That lawsuit remains pending. Importantly, neither the young woman, Trustee Holmes, or other witnesses cooperated with our investigation. Another thing that I think is important regarding this alleged incident between Trustee Holmes and this young woman. Working through the Delgado law firm, we learned that Mayor Henyard authorized an investigation to be conducted by a firm called R.E. Walsh and Associates out of Oak Brook, Illinois. This investigation was not authorized by the board, and the results have not been shared with the board. It is unknown to this day what the scope of the investigation was, who was interviewed, if anyone, what documents were reviewed as part of this investigation or its findings. The R.E. Walsh firm has refused to provide its report or otherwise answer any questions about its investigation because it has not been paid for its services. Let's talk for a moment about Thornton Township. In the course of our investigation, we received a lot of information that there was significant use of Thornton Township funds to cover expenses for the benefit of the village of Dolton. Similar to the lack of cooperation from the village personnel under the control of Mayor Supervisor Henyard, we face obstacles obtaining documents from Thornton Township. We therefore are not suggesting we do not have a complete picture of a variety of the allegations against Mayor Henyard and others in connection with the operation of the township. Nonetheless, we received some information to determine that a similar pattern of financial operations existed at the township during Mayor Henyard's tenure. For example, credit card use. We were able to review records from May of 22 through October of 22, June of 23 through, January of 23 through June of 23, and January of 24 through June of 24. Obviously, not a complete set, but detailed records. Some of these records, excuse me, were heavily redacted. They look like the CIA put the documents through their censors. So it made analysis somewhat difficult. But we were able to decipher some of the records. There were multiple credit cards in use in Thornton Township, and the names of township employees specifically, such as Tony Sherman, Keith Freeman, Shelley Miles, Robert Hunt, Marsha Walker Brown, Tanika Hughes, William Moore, and others. In 2024, for example, based on those 6 months of records, monthly charges range from $88,000 a month to over $100,000 in many of those months. And there were a significant number of food purchases and other expenditures that frankly warrant further investigation as to whether or not there was a legitimate government purpose for those expenses. There was overlapping hiring and firing of township personnel. A number of witnesses that we interviewed indicated that within months of Tiffany Henyard becoming supervisor on March 3rd, 2022, a number of longstanding employees lost their jobs. We heard many allegations about political retaliation, cronyism, and that people were let go because they questioned the seeming elimination of hiring and purchasing norms. Efforts to verify these allegations, principally through FOIA requests, did not bear fruit, as the township often claimed no responsive documents or failed to address specific FOIAs. We know that Henyard hired her boyfriend, Kamal Woods, to run a township youth program. His personnel file, such as it is, contained very little information to justify this hire. Tanika Henyard also became an employee of the township. And Henyard installed her former administrative assistant, Carmen Carlisle, to fill a vacancy left by the death of a long-standing trustee. We received information of various allegations of political retaliation. You are all, by this point, well aware of Henyard's treatment of Township Assessor Cassandra Elston that included locking Elston out of township offices and then later accusing Elston of abandoning her job. All of those things are well documented. We won't go into details. We were able to verify that longtime township employee Dwayne Thrash has alleged in a lawsuit that he was fired from his job, not because of competence or insubordination issues, as were later put into his personnel file, but because he refused efforts by Henyard and Freeman to agree to a plan to effectively let Henyard take control of a local suburban school district on which Thrash was one of 3 members. The alleged plan included creating a paid employee role for Henyard, firing other employees, and terminating the relationship with an existing law firm and instead installing Henyard's chosen law firm. Can you guess? Thrash alleges that he would not agree to the plan and subsequently lost his Thornton Township employment in retaliation. Now, we have a number of recommendations that we are making to the trustees. I'm not going to spend time tonight going through those. The trustees have them. But suffice it to say, there are obvious things related to finance. There are obvious things related to personnel. And some of these things, as I indicated, the trustees have already started to embrace and implement, particularly with respect to putting guardrails around the finances of the village. And with that, we will close. Thank you for your time and attention. Now, as I said at the outset, we've passed out index cards. If you have questions written on them, pass them forward, and we will entertain some questions. Can members of the Park District staff perhaps help us collect some of these cards and bring them forward? If you have a card, hold it up in the air, and somebody will come by. Maybe pass them forward to the front. That's probably the easiest thing to do. And remember, if you'd like an electronic copy of this PowerPoint deck, please make sure you provide your name and your email address. Come on up, man. If you've got questions, please pass up your index card. We'll try to get to as many as we possibly can.
I was having a heart attack.
All right, we have a couple of questions. One is, why didn't the $5 million come to Dolton? The answer is we don't know. What happens is monies get appropriated and become part of a budget. It will go to the relevant state department for allocation, but then the municipality has to fill out certain paperwork in order for it to claim that allocation. We have not found any evidence that happened with the Village of Dolton. This person also asked, is there anything to hold Tiffany personally liable? Well, as you know, there are a number of different lawsuits that have been filed, and obviously you have your vote. Next question is, if supervisor is uninsurable, how can she hold a position? Now, the insurance issue is with respect to her role as the mayor of the Village of Dolton. We have no visibility into whether or not the insurance issue also applies to the township. But she can still hold her position, but as I indicated, with no lack of insurance coverage, it puts the village and the taxpayers potentially at risk. And certainly she would have to pay for her own lawyer, her own defense, if she is sued in the course of her duties. There's a question of who pays the services that are rendered by my colleague and I. As you recall, the trustees voted to approve the hiring of us, and that comes from the village of Dolton. Are you bringing me one more question, ma'am? Come on. Okay, that's fine. Okay. There's a question that whether the village will be able to get federal or state funding to bail us out of this mess. And the answer is, I think that's a matter that the trustees are actively pursuing. There's a question, have all of your findings been given to the FBI and any agency concerned? Maybe we'll all turn and wave to our friends in the federal government who are surely watching this live stream. What I will say is we have been in contact with members of the U.S. Attorney's Office who are investigating this matter. I know that the FBI has also been in contact with various people who have information about the allegations are here. What they intend to do and the timing of that, no one really knows except for them. We'll just sort through and see if there are any other questions. Someone asked, the $5 million grant, was it mismanagement or theft that we did not get it? As I mentioned before, there's a process by which a municipality that gets an appropriation has to claim it. There's no evidence that that process was followed. There's a question of when can vendors expect past due payments to be handled. I'm aware that the trustees are working diligently to try to work through the number of vendors who are owed goods and resources, but recognizing that village resources are tight. There's a question of how much money is owed to credit cards. I think we covered some of that in our report. The trustees have substantially cut down access to credit cards, so we expect credit card spending to go down. Most of the payments were made and the balances paid in total at the time that they were incurred. And the second question, is Tiffany going to be held responsible to repay the money spent on the ice rink? That's a very good question to which we don't have the answer. Okay. All right, we've got the final three questions. All right, final question. The others were request to get a copy of the PowerPoint deck. How many laws have been broken?
That's a
Good question, but impossible to quantify. Thank you all. Thank you all for your time and attention.
Okay, we want to thank everybody for coming out, and on behalf of the Dolton residents, board of trustees, we want to ask everybody to give a round of applause to Mayor Lightfoot for her hard work. Yeah, we were working diligently. This has been very critical for us to start to get a picture of what's going on so we can begin working on that. So Mayor Lightfoot's influence has really been tremendous on us getting on the right path.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned, there were a significant number of folks that didn't cooperate in this investigation, either because they were scared or they chose not to. And there were some people who didn't cooperate initially, but then I'll say saw the light and did. And I want to call out one of those people was Keith Freeman, the administrator. He was definitely team tenured early on and wasn't particularly cooperative, but sometime late last summer, clearly had a change of heart and has been very instrumental in making sure that we got access to the financial records that were critical for us to be able to provide this information to you. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Thank you, Mr. Freeman, for what he has done to work with the trustees and legislative council to make sure that there was more transparency, particularly around financial matters for the village. Thank you all and good night.
She gonna talk? Yeah. Eric.
She talking?
Walk over. Maybe grab it. Yeah, I'm gonna be back. Might you move this back a little? It'll help the angle for everybody. I've been in communication. When she walks up, I'll go down. Thank you.
Can't squat for 20 minutes? Can't squat for 20 minutes? Come on, man. It's a workout. It's a workout. There, he just said time to squat down when she starts. Yes, I know. It's another shot. Said they were expecting to learn more. What they heard in August is somewhat what they heard today.
We've heard various things. Jobs. But what we know is it was a significant struggle to the basic financial information. Of when trustees access to financial information. That still hasn't changed. It's very, very difficult. So as we know that some of the things we provide to get more information, we just were able to get it. It has been interesting to do it. We did get some information in his office. His Freeman making a decision with returning to the state. Broke from their vineyard, but it was still like 40. That's what as we said, we know where things got to really tough, basically, but what happened. I'm not really worried about it. You seem to be doing lots across the country and not really focusing on Dolton. I don't believe that the federal investigation should be doing that. But there's really no way to it seems like every day there's a new thing that happened that was as different and surprise from the day before.
Look at Governor have done more. He said last year that you had this covered. You have no superpowers. So why couldn't the governor step in?
Well, look, that's a question for the governor. I'm focused on
Sure.
No, I'm not going to reply to that. We should ask him a question to him. But you know what I can tell you is that this village has been suffering for many years. That's very well documented. You've documented that from your reporting. They've reached out to a number of different people at the county level, at the state level. They're not getting any response in many instances, let alone any specific relief. I hope that starts to change because there's, from where I sit, I don't know how Dolton is able to address this significant budget deficit without some kind of assistance from the state legislature. I know that there are conversations that are happening around that. But what happens is something will happen is the residents of Dolton have suffered needlessly because of financial
I want to talk to her.